Throughout history, the Catholic Church has documented extraordinary spiritual encounters that challenge our understanding of the divine and the demonic. Among the most fascinating and deeply personal accounts comes from Padre Pio, the Italian Capuchin friar whose life was marked by stigmata, miraculous healings, and intense spiritual warfare. But perhaps the most compelling story, one that has been preserved through the writings of those closest to him, concerns his final confrontation with the devil himself. This is the account of what the devil told Padre Pio during their ultimate battle. Padre Pio was born Francesco Forgione in 1887 in the small village of Pietrelcina in southern Italy. From his earliest childhood, he showed signs of extraordinary spiritual sensitivity. He entered the Capuchin order as a young man and took his vows, dedicating his life entirely to prayer, penance, and service to others. But in 1918, something remarkable and troubling occurred. Padre Pio received the stigmata, the 5 wounds of Christ appearing on his body. His hands, feet, and side bore the marks of the crucifixion, bleeding and painful, visible to all who encountered him. For 50 years, Padre Pio carried these wounds. He became one of the most famous priests in the world, attracting thousands of pilgrims, seeking his counsel, his prayers, and his intercession. The Vatican investigated him extensively, sometimes with suspicion, but eventually recognized the authenticity of his stigmata and his gifts. He heard confessions for hours each day, often knowing the sins of penitents before they spoke. He reported visions of Christ, of the Virgin Mary, and he also encountered dark spiritual forces that attempted to shake his faith and derail his mission. But as Padre Pio grew older, entering his 80s, the spiritual battles intensified. According to those who cared for him in his final years, particularly the friars of San Giovanni Rotondo Monastery, where he spent most of his life, Padre Pio spoke of increasingly direct confrontations with demonic forces. These were not mere temptations or subtle spiritual attacks. They were violent, terrifying, and profoundly personal encounters with what he believed to be the devil himself. In the months before his death in 1968, Padre Pio's confessors and close associates reported that he experienced what can only be described as a final, decisive battle. During this confrontation, which seemed to occur both in his waking hours and in mystical visions, the devil allegedly spoke to him. The words attributed to this dark entity are chilling, revealing, and ultimately triumphant for Padre Pio's spiritual legacy. According to the accounts preserved by his spiritual directors, the devil's first message to Padre Pio was a direct challenge to his faith and his life's work. The devil allegedly told him, "You think you have won, old man, but you have only delayed the inevitable. Look at the world I have built. See how my influence grows. Your prayers, your suffering, your stigmata, they are nothing but drops of water in an ocean of darkness that I control." These words were meant to demoralize, to suggest that despite all of Padre Pio's sacrifices and spiritual victories, the ultimate triumph belonged to the forces of evil. The devil was attempting to undermine the very foundation of Padre Pio's life, his unwavering belief that God's love and mercy would ultimately prevail. This was not a crude temptation to sin or to abandon his vows. This was a sophisticated spiritual attack designed to make Padre Pio doubt the cosmic significance of his suffering and his mission. But according to the accounts, Padre Pio did not waver. Instead, he responded with a clarity and conviction that further enraged the demonic entity. The devil then allegedly revealed his second message, one that strikes at the heart of every spiritual warrior's deepest fears. The devil told Padre Pio, "I know your every weakness. I have watched you for 81 years. I have seen every moment of doubt, every instant of physical agony when the stigmata tormented your body, every loneliness you felt when the church questioned your authenticity. All of these moments belong to me. Your pain is my victory." This statement attempted to reclaim Padre Pio's entire life of suffering, to reinterpret it not as redemptive sacrifice, but as proof of the devil's power and dominion. In the spiritual worldview that Padre Pio inhabited, suffering had profound meaning only if it served the purposes of Christ and the salvation of souls. The devil was attempting to convince him that his suffering had only served the forces of darkness, that it was wasted, meaningless, and a testament to evil rather than to divine grace. Yet according to the documented accounts, it was in response to this second assault that Padre Pio allegedly received what his spiritual directors described as a profound mystical confirmation. In the midst of this spiritual battle, Padre Pio reported experiencing a vision in which he saw the true meaning of his wounds, his prayers, and his sacrifices. He saw countless souls who had been saved through his intercession, through his confessions, through his prayers. He witnessed the impact of his life radiating outward in ways he could never have fully comprehended during his earthly existence. The devil, according to these accounts, was not finished. There was a third message, perhaps the most insidious and seductive of all. The devil allegedly told Padre Pio, "You could have lived differently. You could have enjoyed the pleasures of the flesh, experienced love as other men do, known comfort and ease. Instead, you chose this path of endless suffering. I offered you an escape countless times, and you refused. But now, at the end of your life, I offer you one final gift: peace. Simply renounce your vows, acknowledge that it was all for nothing, die in peace, knowing you no longer need to carry this burden. I will let you rest." This third message was perhaps the devil's most cunning strategy. Rather than demanding sin, rather than threatening further torment, the devil offered what Padre Pio might desperately desire after decades of physical pain: relief, peace, and the end of his spiritual struggle. This was an attempt to corrupt Padre Pio's final hours, not through active wickedness, but through passive surrender. By accepting the devil's offer of peace, Padre Pio would implicitly validate all of the devil's previous claims: that his life had been meaningless, that his suffering had been pointless, that he should surrender to darkness, not in malice, but in exhaustion. But, according to the remarkable accounts preserved by those who were with him, Padre Pio's response to this final temptation revealed the true nature of his spiritual strength. He did not hesitate, did not waver, and did not negotiate. Instead, with a voice that those present described as unusually clear and powerful for a man of his advanced age and frail condition, Padre Pio allegedly spoke directly to the devil. He told the dark entity, "I have never suffered for nothing. Every wound, every moment of pain, every year of my life has been freely given to Christ for the salvation of souls. You cannot claim my suffering, because it was not given to you. It was given to God." Furthermore, Padre Pio allegedly declared, "Your offer of peace is a lie, as it has always been a lie. The peace you offer is the peace of numbness, of surrender to spiritual death. But I have known the true peace of Christ, the peace that passes understanding, the peace that comes from absolute trust in God's mercy and love. That peace is infinitely superior to the false comfort you offer. I reject you, now and forever." According to those who recorded these events, something profound occurred in this moment of spiritual confrontation. The accounts describe a sudden shift in the atmosphere around Padre Pio. The oppressive darkness that had seemed to surround him during the encounter allegedly lifted. Those present reported witnessing an unusual luminescence, a sense of profound peace that filled the room. Padre Pio's face, which had appeared strained and anguished during the battle, reportedly became serene and almost luminous. The devil's response to this final rejection allegedly took the form of an enraged shriek, a sound that witnesses described as utterly inhuman and terrifying, followed by a sudden silence that seemed to indicate the departure of the dark entity. According to the accounts, Padre Pio then spoke calmly to those attending to him, saying, "He is gone. The battle is finished. He has been defeated not by my strength, but by the strength of Christ, who dwells within me, and who has always dwelt within me." But what is the deeper significance of this extraordinary encounter? What can we learn from the devil's words to Padre Pio, and from the spiritual warrior's response? There are several profound lessons embedded within this account. First, the devil's initial claim about the growing darkness in the world represents a fundamental spiritual truth. Evil is real, it is active, and it often appears to be winning in the material world. Evil spreads through violence, through corruption, through the erosion of moral values, and through the exploitation of human weakness. The devil's boast about his growing influence reflects a reality that anyone observing the modern world cannot entirely deny. He assumes that Padre Pio's faith was grounded in external circumstances, in visible evidence of spiritual victory. In truth, Padre Pio's faith was rooted in something far deeper, a direct personal relationship with Christ, and an absolute conviction in the ultimate triumph of God's love. This is a critical distinction. The devil operates through deception and through appeals to visible, material reality. He can point to suffering and say it is evidence of his power. He can point to injustice and say it proves God's absence or powerlessness. But authentic faith is not dependent on these external circumstances. The second lesson involves the devil's intimate knowledge of Padre Pio's struggles and weaknesses. This is not meant to suggest that the devil is omniscient, but rather that he is intelligent, observant, and deeply experienced in understanding human psychology and spiritual vulnerability. The devil knew that Padre Pio's stigmata brought him not only spiritual consolation, but also profound physical pain. The devil knew that Padre Pio had experienced moments of doubt and questioning. The devil knew that the church itself had sometimes viewed Padre Pio with suspicion. The devil's strategy was to use these known vulnerabilities as weapons. But here again, the devil's fundamental miscalculation becomes evident. Knowing someone's weaknesses is not the same as controlling their will. Padre Pio acknowledged his suffering and his moments of doubt, but he understood them within a larger spiritual framework. His pain had meaning because he had offered it to Christ. His doubts did not diminish his fundamental commitment to God. The church's suspicion, while perhaps hurtful, did not shake his confidence in the authenticity of his calling. Padre Pio had learned to transmute his suffering into spiritual gold, to understand his trials not as evidence of defeat, but as participation in Christ's passion. The third and perhaps most insidious message, the devil's final offer of peace through surrender, reveals something crucial about how spiritual evil operates. The devil does not always appeal to our basest desires. Sometimes the devil appeals to our legitimate desires, for comfort, for peace, for rest, and attempts to corrupt them through spiritual surrender. The devil's offer would have brought Padre Pio physical relief, perhaps even a kind of peace in his final days. But it would have been purchased at the cost of spiritual betrayal and the invalidation of his entire life's meaning. This is extraordinarily relevant to modern spiritual life. We live in an age of comfort and ease for many people, at least in the developed world. We have access to pleasures and conveniences that would have seemed miraculous to previous generations. The temptation, therefore, is not necessarily to grave sin, but to spiritual complacency. The devil's offer to Padre Pio was updated for the modern context. The devil tells contemporary spiritual seekers, stop struggling, stop questioning, accept a comfortable, shallow faith, enjoy your pleasures, pursue comfort. Forget about the deeper spiritual meaning of your existence. This is perhaps more dangerous than overt temptation to wickedness, because it operates through the seduction of ease. Padre Pio's response reveals the antidote to this spiritual poison. He consciously chose continued struggle, continued suffering, because he understood that these things had meaning within a larger spiritual narrative. He chose the peace of Christ, which he described as the peace that surpasses understanding, over the false peace of spiritual numbness. This peace is not the absence of struggle or pain. Rather, it is the profound inner calm that comes from knowing that one's suffering has meaning. One can know that one is participating in something far greater than oneself, and that one's choices serve purposes that extend beyond personal comfort into the realm of eternal spiritual significance. The accounts of Padre Pio's final battle also raise important questions about the nature of evil and the nature of spiritual warfare. In contemporary secular society, we have largely relegated the devil to the realm of mythology, a symbolic representation of human potential for wickedness, rather than an actual conscious entity. The Christian tradition, particularly the Catholic tradition in which Padre Pio was formed, maintains that the devil is a real angelic being who rebelled against God and who actively works to corrupt human souls and frustrate God's purposes in the world. But whether we understand the devil as a literal entity or as a symbolic representation of evil, the truths embedded in Padre Pio's encounter remain valid. Evil is intelligent. It knows our weaknesses and exploits them. It operates through seduction and deception as often as through overt temptation. It attempts to make us believe that our suffering is meaningless, that our sacrifices are wasted, and that surrender to despair or spiritual numbness is the wisest course. Against these assaults, the most effective defense is not rational argumentation, but rather a grounded, embodied faith, rooted in direct experience of divine love and grace.